YouTube a little slow today. There we go. I'm just going to retweet this with the link. And we're ready. Hello there, Hawkeye fans, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on HawkFanatic.com. Thursday, June the 29th. It's almost July, believe it or not. 9:15 a.m. Central Time. I am Rob Howe, joined as always by Scott Docterman from The Athletic. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you will see a third square on the Hollywood squares here. Is John Bonenkamp.
It's like the Brady Bunch. I mean,
yes. We have the 70s square. They love to use the square approach in the 70s and 60s to get as many people on the screen as possible.
Yes,
and we're bringing that back now with Zooms.
Yes, they did. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Zoom is, we always talk about the Jetsons, because now we have FaceTime and everything from the Jetsons. And now, from kind of combining that with the Brady Bunch and the Hollywood Squares, here we are.
Well, we had John on today to talk Hawkeye Sports. He works with me at one of my other jobs that isn't this job, so I won't mention that job on this. But he and I are both similar in that we are independent contractors, kind of like hitmen for various media outlets around the state and beyond. So John was up late last night covering the Burlington Bees and got a late start and hopefully didn't hurt his lungs at all from this crazy smoke we're having in the area. I went for a walk in it for like an hour before I knew on Tuesday and have kind of been in the house since then, but hopefully everybody's being safe out there. It's just bizarre.
The guys were having a hard time with fly balls once it got into about the late innings and the lights came on. And I don't know how that one kid caught the last fly ball to end the game. And I don't think he knew either until the last second. I think he just kind of ran where he thought it was going to be and it fell there. So, but it was fascinating to see the air and just see how they played in it. I don't know how they played it, but by God they did. So
yeah, I know they're postponing high school events now, which is tough in the summer because then they start to pile up and you're moving towards the postseason already.
Postseason starts Friday for some teams.
Yeah, so hopefully this stuff moves on out and we can breathe again. We also had John on to talk about the passing of our friend and colleague Steve Batterson, 38 years at the Quad City Times, passed away on Tuesday, and all of our hearts are pretty heavy. And we're going to talk a lot more about that at the end of this podcast and dedicate that last segment to talking and remembering Steve. And I'm starting to well up a little bit now, so it's probably good that we save that till the end. So if I break down at all, we can do it at the end. And if people don't want to see that, they can move on. But we are going to talk Hawkeye Sports as we always do here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Let's start with the gambling situation because I know you guys and we get the question, what's going on with the gambling situation? When are we going to find out about the gambling situation? It seems like it's been going on forever, but we did get some news yesterday from the NCAA that they have adjusted, updated, brought into this century the rules for gambling. They're a little, the rules were different when they made, or the environment was different when they made the rules, right? There wasn't legalized gambling all over the country and things like that. So it was long overdue. It's unfortunate that Iowa State got caught up in this and kind of became, for lack of a better term, the kind of, the test sample for this, and kind of brought a lot of notoriety to this, but it sounds like hopefully we get a conclusion here soon, Scott. And why don't you let the people kind of know what happened yesterday and kind of how that impacts what Iowa and Iowa State can expect.
Yeah, it's I think these are really important, and I think it kind of shows that the conclusion is on the horizon here, because by clarifying these penalties, pardon me, this
Bless you.
this smoke is getting to me too. I mean, I'll tell you what, I'm doubling up on my Claritin-D. But first of all, if anybody bets on the outcome of their games or knowingly provides people in sports betting, they're out. And I think everybody agrees to that. If you knew, or if you heard of, somebody saying, that they're going to a bookie, or they're going to even to their app 20 minutes before kickoff, or they're telling somebody they know about, hey, this player is not going to play, you might want to load up, and that's, going to cost you. And that's probably what it's there. Nobody, I think, disagrees with that. Then if somebody wagers on their own sport at another school, they could lose 50%. But then of course you can't, the one that's probably the sticking point is they could lose eligibility if they bet on their own school. And that really is going to be the sticking point. But the new guidelines apply to violations reported on or after May 2nd, which is really a pivotal time here, because that was when Iowa self-reported all this information. And the new penalties are streamlined, and I think they are more fair. I mean, we can all agree to blast the NCAA, but this, I think, is pretty straightforward. If somebody wagered $200 or less, only further education is required. If it's less than 500, but more than 200, you lose 10% of your season plus further education. So in football, that's 1 to 2 games of suspension. And then from 500 to 800 bucks, it's loss of 30% of a season. So that's basically 4 games if you're talking football.
And we had the young man at Virginia Tech. How much time did he lose, the football player?
Alan Tisdale originally was he had bet around $400, but he placed about 100 plus bets,
which is still amazing to me. But
yeah, I mean, that's like playing penny slots in Vegas, but he lost originally 9 games, and then they appealed and it went to 6. But man, that's a lot of time, and I think this is. It was pretty ambiguous, the rules. There was really no definition to them. But now if it's more than $800, which I think we could agree that if you're an athlete and you're betting $800 on sports, it's probably it's probably an issue that needs to be discussed. And, reinstatement staff will consider whether further loss of eligibility is appropriate, including potential permanent ineligibility. So I think that's really impactful here for Iowa, because I don't know the amounts. I don't think any of us know specifics unless we're getting it leaked, and I haven't gotten the full leak on this. But I will say that this streamlines the process, and I think if you fall in these categories, as long as you didn't bet on Iowa or your sport, I think it's pretty fair. I dare I say.
Yeah, I would agree. John, I know you covered Iowa baseball for us this season, and that was the sport that was most recognizable because they were in season. I was only out there once, I think, before the Big Ten tournament, and interviewed Rick and a couple of the players, and it just seemed the biggest thing for them was not knowing, just the uncertainty. You saw that too. Kind of what were your observations on that, and kind of what are your feelings on them, as Scott said, kind of streamlining and kind of cementing, having concrete rules now?
I think it's a good idea, because like I said, everybody kind of knew. Everybody wondered, well, what's it going to be? Is it going to be like the Virginia Tech player? Is it going to be a half season? What the equivalent to a half season? And so basically those guys have already lost a lot of games when you think about it, because they didn't play.
Was it over 25%? Did they lose? How much did they lose? They lose was it over 20 games?
if you counted the Big Ten tournament in the NCAA games, it was probably pretty close to that. I mean, it was double digits. And so I think there's probably, so again, who knows how much they were betting, who knows what they bet on, that sort of thing. But when you lost a key player like they did, it really kind of magnified that too as well. But yeah, it was just the uncertainty is are these guys going to be back next week? Or they get, and the fact, the longer it dragged on, you just kind of got the impression was, okay, they're not coming back this year. And I think maybe Rick and them kind of took that approach of, okay, if they're here, great. If not, this, we've got it. And, this is how we're going to, this is the plan. But, it really, like I said, that was the season that I think was impacted the most, because you lost a key player. You lost, you lost some reserves that you might have been able to use. And it just really kind of hung over that team. And to their credit, it didn't affect them at all. I mean, I thought they were playing their best baseball at the end. And that to me is a credit to the coaching staff and to the players.
Yeah, no question. I think you look at Keaton Anthony, especially, who's, played in 43 out of the 60 games. So he lost more than 28% of his season. So that's really, that puts him squarely in the 500 to 800 category. And now, is it more than that? I don't know. I don't know if you bet $5 or $5,000, but I think that it does kind of streamline, okay, if let's say you bet $750, then that's basically time served in some ways, and plus it was such a critical time of the year. Not that there should be a multiplier on the number of games, but
right.
But you suspended him for the stretch run, the Big Ten tournament, and the NCAA tournament. Those are killers. And now, granted, I think he's probably going to the draft, but at the same time, I know it didn't really work out for him out at the Cape Cod League. So, maybe this could give him another option rather than permanent ineligibility, unless he would happen to bet on Iowa in another sport. Then, the likelihood is then he'll never play again for Iowa. And that's going to be the tough thing. And that's, if anybody did do that, and I'm not saying they did, but the rumors have been out there for a long time that some of the athletes bet on the Iowa South Carolina women's basketball Final Four game. If that's the case, they're going to be permanently ineligible, and that's probably the touching the third wire here, of when it comes to gambling.
The key will be if the NCAA says, okay, you bet on that in March, before our rule. And so do we give you a pass on that? I don't know. It'll be curious to see how the NCAA handles this group and the Iowa State group too, considering when were the bets placed, that sort of thing. Who knows? I think everybody kind of wants to see it reach its conclusion here at some point, and so idea. And I think the players are deserved. I think players deserve that. I think everybody needs to know now. They need to act on this fairly quickly, I think.
Yeah.
I think probably the best part of this, and you don't want to see anybody penalized unfairly, because to think that Iowa and Iowa State had the only student athletes gambling is just ridiculous. So they've kind of been made an example of, but then as Scott and I use the example of, if you're speeding, John, and you get caught, it's not the cop's fault. It's your fault.
Exactly.
So that's kind of where we are here. What I like is now we know. And it's been brought to the forefront for these student athletes. It was a big story yesterday when the NCAA announced the changes. Now. So there were excuses before, but now it's even more shame on you if you do something beyond these guidelines. And the one thing I think that I agree with, there are some, tentacles to this that I may not agree with, but I do agree that you shouldn't be able to bet on your school. There's just too much. We know, we're around it a lot. We know the interaction between the different student athletes from different sports, that there's too much of a chance there for inside information. And compromising the integrity of gambling. I can't believe I'm compromising the integrity.
Yeah.
There is
But there you
integrity in legalized gambling. The
Yeah.
one thing I'm curious, and I didn't really read. I just kind of saw the penalties yesterday. I'm assuming that it can still be, you can bet on sports that aren't part of the NCAA, like you could bet on NASCAR, and you can bet on, you can still do that.
Boxing, UFC,
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
that sort of thing. Which, by the way, NASCAR, you get really good paydays out of.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't know if that was still in there yet. And again, I don't know how many people would bet on some of that stuff, but I think, again, the clarification in my mind, like you said, if you screw up now, that's on you. That's really on you now.
No question. Because you look now, it's like, here's the test example. Here's where everybody's going to know about it. And this is what everybody's going to point at, from not only the two schools in state, but around the country. It's like, look what happened at Iowa. They had 26. Iowa State had 15. Their starter here, I won't say who, their starter here, they're not going to play for 2 games. They're not going to play for 30% of their season or whatever because of this. So take this seriously. This isn't just some, I'll try to get away with it type of thing. And then I wholeheartedly agree that betting on your school is not the case. I mean, let's take male athletes, for instance. The night before a home, say an 11 o'clock basketball game on a Saturday, and the night before a couple of basketball players are hanging out with a couple of football players, and one of the basketball players gets hammered or something, or slips and falls at a party or their house, and they're feeling like crap. It's like, hey, they were supposed that, they were a 6-point favorite, and he's got to be playing against this guy who's might be all Big Ten. I'm betting against my team, or whatever, or somebody was like, hey man, I woke up really sick, and he's one of your roommates on the basketball team, and he's going to try to fight through it before everybody knows. That's the lack of integrity in gambling. And I think, making sure that you don't, have any impropriety in this. That's what it's all about. So I completely understand and agree with that. I don't think, and now it's out there. And as soon as the penalties are announced, everybody will see the examples, and they can make these examples, especially in the off season, for education for every athlete.
It's insider trading.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
It's like, if you, I was just thinking of something. If you're a track athlete, you go over to the hospital for physical therapy, and Cade McNamara comes looping in the day before the game, well, hey, I'm going to bet on whoever tomorrow, because he's not going to. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Like I said, it's insider trading. You go to jail for insider trading, and and in the NCAA's case, you're done. So, I just think I'm glad that it's spelled out for them.
Yeah,
and hopefully we'll get announcements here soon, so everybody, what the penalties are for the involved student athletes at Iowa and Iowa State, and we can, put that to bed, and hopefully not have to cover a story like this again, now that students know the rules. But I think it's funny too, because these kids are playing. Who in America doesn't play an NCAA tournament pool,
right?
Or the squares for the Super Bowl? I mean, that's why I get it. I understand there has to be regulations. There have to be regulations in a situation like this, but I also think there's some of it can be hypocritical too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and fantasy sports too.
Exactly.
You're right. I mean, it's like there's still things you can do, to get around it. And I don't know. It's a world we live in. And again, like everything else, the NCAA didn't know how to handle it until it was on their doorstep.
Well, yeah. And there's just, it's a new, I understand this, that it's a new beginning, if you will, a new era, that gambling and betting is not as taboo as it once was, where, like when Riverside Casino became part of, opened, and then it bought a suite at Kinnick, and then all commercials had to be referred to as Riverside Golf Resort, because it couldn't handle the gambling, part of it. And now it's so open and there's so much linkage up, it really would be hypocritical for institutions to completely shut this down. I mean, you don't want impropriety, of course, but you want to make sure that it's not poo-pooed either, because that's going to be a source of revenue for them. So, I like the thought of streamlining it, of keeping it tight, making it everything understandable, but also I think this is really important for the athletes. I think they're obviously so embarrassed, I'm sure, once this comes out, that the ones that got caught aren't going to do it again, at least as long as they're wearing a college uniform.
When you were talking about Riverside, and you're right. I mean, how long's that casino been open? And we've heard stories about football players that have gone down and played blackjack.
I've seen it. I've seen it.
Yes, and we've seen them.
Basketball too.
Yes, and we'll be we go to these casinos, and you'll hear stories about, I saw so and so playing blackjack last night, and that sort of thing. So I mean, it's been going on for a long time, and it's and it's there. Like I said, this is, at least now we have some clarification on certain things.
I remember going to the Battle for Atlantis tournament, basketball tournament in 2014, I think it was. And, seeing several basketball players in the casino part of that. And they looked at me and they kind of turned away. And I'm like, you're in a foreign country, dude. I don't care.
Yeah.
As long as you're not over the sports book part of things, you're
right.
Good.
And we've come a long way from Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays being ostracized for what were they? They were basically endorsing a casino. So the landscape has changed a ton, and so easy now, right? You got an app on your phone, it takes 2 seconds to put it in there. And I should say this too. I mean, there are people, I'm not a big gambler. I'll put a couple bucks down here or there, like on an NBA finals or a college football game or something like that. But there are people in our business too that look for the insider information and interview coaches and players with that angle in mind. Can I get an edge? So it's everywhere, right? So it's better to address it than just let it go behind the scenes. And then that's when you have, some type of massive case where, there's just a ring of, compromised gambling.
Oh, there have been friends of mine that will text me on game day and is so and so going to play. And a lot of times I don't know,
Yeah.
And, what should I do here? Which, I mean, the advice last year during football season was always bet the under.
Yes.
But I mean, and they figured that out at some point. So they didn't need that advice.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would hear from people that what have you heard? And it's like, I don't know,
You guys ever noticed there's like gambling people that follow you on Twitter? Just pop up. You're like, who's that? Oh, that's somebody from, they're looking to see, they want to see when you get to a game, you start to tweet out who's not dressed, who's not playing. They want that information.
Absolutely. They do. It's really impactful. I mean, who's not more, who's out in warmups and who's, wearing something, who's not even dressed, who's coach told me.
Even in game. The Nebraska game, if Spencer Petras got knocked out, Cooper DeJean gets knocked out. Are they coming back? Because there's in-game betting.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So. I do think, and I don't know what you guys think about this, but I do think that especially in football, that you should almost have like the NFL with an injury report. Now I know there's the HIPAA thing and there's some different things there, but I mean there are some schools that actually do an injury report.
Wisconsin does every game, and I think saying who's out shouldn't be that hard,
right?
And the problem is, I understand it from their perspective too, is that somebody is, let's say they got an ankle sprain, or it can even be a high ankle, but they're working through it, they're battling, you're not sure if they're going to play or not, or it happened at practice on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and it's like, yeah, we're doing all kinds of rehab this week. We're massaging it. It's not going to be 100%. He's going to test it out on Saturday. Those are things that, but that would fall under questionable. but I think anybody at the beginning of the week is out, or by say Wednesday, I think that should probably be there just to protect the integrity of the game.
Right. I agree.
It'd probably be good for the NCAA to kind of make that, the NFL, that's a rule that you have to put an injury report out. May not be a bad idea for the NCAA or College Football Rules Committee, somebody to do that.
Yeah. The governance structure at the Power 5 level probably should be the ones, but that's going to require a different level of leadership at that. I think, once football eventually breaks away and has its own governance structure, then I think that could be something that really comes about. Otherwise, you're talking about conference versus conference, and then even team versus team. Because hell, in the Big Ten, half the teams now have gone away from even offering a 2-deep. Let alone an injury report, and it's like, Iowa's been really good about it. Nebraska's been great about it. But then like Michigan and Minnesota and some of these other teams have just completely ignored it. And I'm like, I don't get it. I think it's bullshit. But
pain in the ass when you're trying to write a preview and a team doesn't have a 2-deep and information in their notes.
Exactly. I mean, if nothing else, provide that, anything can happen. I mean, you're just putting names on a piece of paper and, and
I don't think Kirk pours over his 2-deep.
No, he doesn't. And I don't care about that either. No. I mean, everybody else does. I mean, like just wait until we get the Big Ten Media Days next month, and they got the new media guide, and it'll have the 2-deeps going into fall, and people will lose their mind if Caleb Brown, for instance, maybe not is listed as a starter. And it's like, guys, really?
Those are my favorite parts when you throw a question at him and he's like, "Oh, is that on the 2-deep?"
Yeah,
exactly. Remember?
Yeah,
because actually they have to go through training camp and decide who's on the stupid 2-deep.
Yeah,
the quizzical looks, those are always my favorite.
Yeah. And then
he'll say, "You guys know better than I do."
Yeah, I mean, and it's hilarious because like whoever's listed as the second left guard is not the second left guard. It's the third tackle, or then there's a tackle who's a swing tackle. Maybe the right tackle goes to left, and somebody comes in from right guard to right tackle. I mean, it's all over the place. That's not a big deal to me, because the only thing I really care about and really frustrates me is on game day, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here on this, is when I'm trying to look to identify numbers with players, and you're clued in and looking, there's not something straightforward that has this. You're looking at the entire roster of 125 players instead of, number 3 is the cornerback, number 5 is the safety, that type of thing. And that is really frustrating. I wish they would at least have that on a piece of paper.
The good old days when Al Grady used to ask about the third team fullback. May Al rest in peace. Al was one of those people that loved the depth chart, and former Iowa City Press Citizen sports editor.
Yes.
Kirk, who's your third string left tackle?
Al was one of a kind.
God bless him.
Yeah.
Let's stay with the Iowa State theme. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, and the conversation between, the different beer companies that are. No, I'm not going into that.
All right, the Weebo Collective and beer. Yeah, you bet.
How insane are we becoming as a society where this stuff becomes like day or days long battles on social media over beer companies sponsoring a given athletic department? Where the hell are we going?
I saw that. Okay, I just caught bits and pieces of that yesterday, and I was the same way. I'm like, we're really doing this? And then I thought, yeah, we always do this.
Yeah.
But it was the argument over beer companies, and I saw somebody say, "Well, I'm not going there anymore."
Yeah.
I've tried to make an argument for Minnesota and Wisconsin being Iowa's main rivals, because I like those rivalries better than Nebraska and Iowa State. But I think if you base it on social media, and that's always a dangerous approach, that the Iowa and Iowa State fans and Iowa and Nebraska fans tangle way more than Iowa and Wisconsin or Minnesota. It's not even close.
Yeah, it's not close. I mean, and I think I've thought for a long time, ever since Nebraska joined the league, all it's going to take is some sort of major game between the two programs, and that will send this into Rivalry orbit because they have two incredible, passionate audiences that really come from different angles, and it's like oil and water. One's Iowa, and I think we can all agree, is maybe a little insecure, and Nebraska is very self-righteous. So those two detriments do not mix well together. And then you throw on Iowa State, has sadly the same insecurity complex that Iowa does, except they had the inferiority part of it being the little brother in the Big Ten, so or Big 12, with Iowa, and so you throw all those in the mix, and then it's awesome for social media until you get caught in the crossfire, which Lord knows I do enough.
Oh, that's why I try to stay out of it. I mean, you guys do your thing here, and because somehow or another I always get caught up in the Iowa UNI basketball stuff. And I don't know how that happens, but we'll
get to that in a minute with our next topic here, which is where I was going before I interjected the beer. And I will say, we're not, we're a Hawkeye podcast, but if the two beer companies want to send us some samples, we'll sample the beer and give a review, and we're happy to do that. We're on both sides when it comes to beer.
Yeah, I have no preference. I just like good beer, but I'll tell you this, I did have the Swarm beer at when it's unveiling.
All right, we got a review from Scott Doctorman on the Swarm beer.
And I had to make sure that it wasn't, I had to test it a couple of times, 5 times.
Well, that's good. I mean, you got to be thorough.
I had to test it 5 times over an hour and a half just to make sure it was okay, and out of a pint. And I would give it, I don't know how many. Let's go with the ranking system for athletes. 5 stars. I'll give it a high 4.5 to 5 stars. It's a lot like Spotted Cow. It's just a little tad bit stronger, I would say. It's got a little bit more bite, not much, but it's very smooth. It's crisp, and it's got a little bite to it. So I think it was they hit a home run with the Swarm beer. Now I will be very. I imagine if the We Will Collective's beer will be very smooth, almost water-like, and we know that means great things for me. I'm sorry.
I saved that. I have that video bookmarked.
I do too.
By the way.
Oh my God.
The Ames water.
Scott just steps right into it. It's all yours, babe. You take it. I'm not getting involved in that.
Hooray!
John. This is the man that mixes it up for days with Nebraska fans. He loves to poke the bear.
I find that humorous, and it entertains me more than anything else. So.
Scott is a bear poker.
Yeah, there are times I'm like, don't do it. No, all right.
Well, hopefully the 2nd September every year there should be beer sharing, right? The Iowa, if the game's at Jack Trice like it is this year, do a little trade off, Swarm. We do the trade beer, make it fun, make it communal. Don't try to take sides. Beer should be enjoyed by everybody.
Right. Exactly. That's what we do. That's how you do it. And that's the things that people debate, and I don't get it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, this breaks up the monopoly that Busch Light had on the state. And I tell you this, that there are very, very, very few fan bases out there that can match Iowa and Iowa State. I wrote about
you mean drinking wise?
And drinking wise, you bet. I wrote about Busch Light U a few years ago, and about how they took over Memphis in San Antonio, and like Memphis, they just wiped it out. And then in San Antonio, they went down there and then they leaned into it. They're like, yeah, we'll get all the Busch Light there. And they had like 59 cans left out of like 60,000 or something at the Arena Stadium. And then of course, Iowa in 2015 at the Big Ten title game, that was a massacre. That was like a combine going to a field, just locusts during the 30s.
I don't get the Busch Light thing, and I like the original Busch beer, but I don't get it. But everybody likes it, so okay, whatever. But I don't know. I don't get it, but it's the thing, I guess.
Yeah, I think when you get to that level of beer, no offense to anybody, but if it's like a a lower end, a lower shelf, if we're talking about alcohol, not a top shelf, but a lower shelf beer that's light, whether it's freaking, I'll date my Schlitz light or some of those like PBR, those original beers were really good.
They still,
but then they made the light versions that people, then we got into exercise and all that stuff. So we have to have light beer, and those beers suck. My opinion.
Well, at some point, it all tastes the same. When you're on your fourth, it all tastes the same. So,
well, I think I can reflect a little bit on my time and, where John lives now and my B-Town era, where we used to go to this place that's no longer there, by the way, it's been torn down, BG's By and By on West Avenue. And they used to have 69-cent 40 ounces of old Milwaukee's Best Light. And you want to talk about ass beer, that was it. But it was 69 cents at 40. So we would go in and buy as many as we could. And we were 16 years old. And I remember one time my friend goes in there and I'm helping him carry stuff out. And he's like, can I get a bag for this? He goes, yeah, because you're not old enough to buy it. But he didn't care. But Buzz only had a couple of teeth. So it worked out all right for him because we gave him a tip at the bar. But, so Busch Light and Old Style Light were kind of what we graduated to, because they were like, at that point, like $5.99 a 12 pack or $5 a 12 pack. And so we would get those, or it might be less than that actually. And, but now I've graduated and now probably have to go back down the hill.
When you're young now, and economics are a part of it, you got to do what you got to do. Yeah. But I'm talking about now from an old dude standpoint, whereas when I was, young, when I got to drinking age, when I first started drinking.
Yeah.
I remember one time in the dorms, we had a keg of Budweiser. And so we saved the top, where it says Budweiser.
Yeah.
And from then on, they'd go get pony kegs of Milwaukee's Best and then put the Budweiser thing, and nobody knew the difference. No. Nobody cared, So I remember those days. So.
Yeah, when you're doing keg stands, it really doesn't matter what's coming out of there. You're pretty much at the mercy of the party. So you go with the flow, so to speak.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who had a keg refrigerator in his kitchen. His dad had given it. Dad owned a restaurant, and they gave it to him. So you would go over there, and they'd have the plastic cups from the field house or whatever. You just fill up a beer and sit down. You didn't have.
That's dangerous.
You didn't have to take cans back. You didn't have to, You just went and replaced the keg, and by God, that was. I visited them a lot. So,
hey, I had a lot of cans in my apartment. I was the first one in Burlington of my friends to have their own apartment, and those cans helped pay for a lot of different things.
Oh, sure.
Then. I was paid for my cigarette habit back then, which I'm thrilled to say that I have given up almost at 25 years since I last smoked there, but it paid for my own beer because I always said I have a tax if you're coming to my house, and and Lord knows there are a lot of stories that I could share and some that will never be shared, or at least on this platform. But Burlington is its own entity when it comes to that, more than
it is.
Yeah.
Dino in the chat room is definitely a fan of the Swarm B. Yeah. Swarm beer officially at Kinnick now. Exile confirmed. Swarm beer is really good, says Dino in the YouTube chat room. So we've got an agreeable person with Scott. I will try that when I get a chance.
No doubt. Worth it. It really is. And here's the thing, though. I think both, Iowa first, because Iowa came up with the idea first, but also Iowa State this is something that will go over well with fans, because the casual fans who are not married to one certain kind of beer will say, let's pick up something. Well, exactly where some of this money goes to. It goes to the product on the field. And even if it's a little bit, even at the end of the year, if it's, let's say they net, $40,000 for the collective, that might get you one shooting guard. That might get you a wide receiver. That might get you a backup tight end. So anything like that is really helpful, I think, and it's really ingenious. And then, of course, the taste is worth it. I was like pleasantly surprised. I thought, I'll give it a shot, see what happens. See if it tastes like my favorite beer, Hams. But it was a little bit better than Hams.
If you're going to do that, if you're going to do it, it has to be done right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't sell really bad beer that leaves an aftertaste for 4 days.
Yeah.
And so apparently they've done that, and again, it's a very ingenious what they did. So
yeah, no doubt. I mean, if you have to be creative with the NIL, and if you're going after the hearts of Iowa and Iowa State fans, beer is a great place to start. Yep. And next up, which should be what? Breakfast pizza? Sponsor breakfast pizza to kick back to the NIL. That's an Iowa thing, right?
It's coming. It has to be coming at some point.
Valet parking at sporting events.
There you go. That's a good one.
Yeah.
No, they're going to come out of our parking spot.
No. You can park like at the old Capitol Mall in downtown Iowa City, okay. and then they have a shuttle and runs it back and forth.
Okay.
There you go.
After the game might be tough because then you're stuck in traffic for half an hour and you're like, I could just walk there.
Right.
Well, we got to that point of talking about beer when I was going to talk about the Iowa and Iowa State men's basketball schedules, particularly the non-conference schedules, which have also created some conversation with both fan bases in terms of basically who plays the shittier non-conference schedule, who has the worst beer and who plays the worst non-conference schedule. I know John was talking about this before we started recording. There's nuance to it, right, John, where both Iowa and Iowa State play in very difficult conferences. Both conferences are getting more difficult, especially from a basketball standpoint, when you look at USC, UCLA, and then some of the, Cincinnati, who else called Houston. I mean, both conferences are going to be better, but it seems like there has to be a balance there where you can accommodate your fans at home. As we were talking about, a lot of the better non-conference games are neutral site or, exempt tournament, things like that. But you either have to reduce the prices of tickets. I know that's like blasphemy when it comes to athletic department people, but I don't understand how they're going to be able to, and maybe they don't care, put asses in the seats for bad non-conference games at home when, people are paying full price for tickets.
Yeah. And I do think that, we've all been covering these guys for a long time. And, I think back to the late 90s, the home and home with Kansas, and they had a home and home with Duke. And in the mid 90s, and they had, UCLA, I remember, came to Carver at one point.
Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri. And I mean, I'd love to see that series come back, but I don't know if it ever will,
Norm Stewart.
Yeah. And how many times do we make that trip to Columbia, which was always a great trip. I love going down there. But the days of those games, I think, and you look around the country, it's becoming that way everywhere, unless TV gets involved, unless TV puts something together where you play a home and home. It's Kentucky and Michigan State in New York City. You look at Iowa this year and they're playing in their best non-conference games at Creighton. I mean, which is part of the Gavitt games, you've got the tournament in San Diego, which I think is a good tournament for them.
The ACC Big Ten going away that's a tough one because they used to alternate the Gavitt games in the ACC. One of those would be at home.
Right. And so now the league is going to have to come up with something new to kind of help that out, whether it's, but again, with the TV deals, with Iowa's, with the Big Ten's TV deals, who do you get to come in as well? It's going to be really fascinating to see where this goes. And it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes if the Big Ten schedule expands with the two new teams coming, with USC and UCLA coming in. Does it go to 22 games? And then at which point the hand wringing over the net and all that that doesn't matter. I mean, because your net is going to be really good playing in a power conference. If you're winning 19, 20 games, it's going to be just fine. But it's it's not fair to the fans, I think, because I think you have to have at least one marquee team, whether it's Iowa State, whether it's a Gavitt Games game, whether it's whatever, you have to have one of those. And I don't think either one of the schools have one of those this year. And I think that's hard for the fans, I think. And it's hard for them to justify sometimes going to some of these things if they're not very good games.
Scott, how much of this is a media rights thing? Because it seems like we've swung all the way to these non-exempt tournaments, whether we're in the Bahamas or Hawaii, or, as John would say, neutral site games in like New York or Disney World or wherever. It seems like the TV stations like those locations and those games better than the old home and homes where you had on campus. To me, I think, sending ESPN's Game Day to, a campus where you get the feel of college athletics, there's value in that, but just doesn't seem like the TV and media rights people value that as much as they used to.
What you're looking at, Rob, is, November, December.
Right.
And we do have to take it in context a little bit and then break it down. One is 25 years ago or whatever, when you look at the Big Ten specifically, the football season ended before Thanksgiving. And then it seemed like there was a clear break between the seasons. Yeah. And then there was no championship game. There was no game on Thanksgiving weekend. For Iowa, when they played the round robin within the state, then it usually started right after Thanksgiving. So it was kind of like this break. Okay, football season ended, basketball season's here, and you can kind of move on. Well, the schedule has crept, or whatever you want to say, up to early November. When you're having exhibitions in late October and first week of November, football is on the mind. Football is the big sport.
That's the home stretch for football.
Right. And so basketball is trying to get games in, but you're asking too much of your fans when you start putting these games on, say the football team's at home the second weekend. And, like this year, I think Iowa was playing Rutgers in football, the 9th or something like that, or the 11th, I'm sorry. And then Alabama State's at home the night before. What you're trying to do is catch some people who are here, but then you're also trying to grab people who are out in the community. They're not going to go to all these games. And if it's a bad game, they're not. I mean, you're talking about like Alabama State, their net last year was 346. And it's like, it's a Friday night and, there's other things to do. And I think but when specifically, when you start talking about media non-conference, is that ESPN and the Big Ten and ACC had a great thing going with the ACC Big Ten Challenge. That was terrific television. It was made for TV. It came at a good time early in the week, so people would watch, and people would watch other games and stuff like that. Well, when the Big Ten dropped its ESPN package, that went with it. And now it's ACC, SEC, and the Big Ten hasn't added it. And most of that is because there's no Kevin Warren. He was out to lunch, and Tony Petitti had a million other things to do when he came in there. So. And by the way, Caitlin Clark was just named the Big Ten Female Athlete of the Year. But
I'm sure you couldn't have gotten any odds on that going back to the gambling conversation.
Exactly. But then, but the problem, I think, right now, with exempt tournaments, and I've been to them. I've been to Cancun and the Bahamas and Vegas, and they're fun and they're great, and some of your fans go. But those environments are not anything close to what they are in campus. I mean, I've been to a ballroom in Cancun where they had metal bleachers and there was about 1,000 people in there. And yes, it was loud because the metal bleachers were like high school bleachers. And I mean, high school football bleachers, not basketball bleachers. But what are you doing to your fans here? Because they want variety in their schedule. It is basketball. It's not football. Every game is not life or death. And losing a game against Arkansas at home is better than beating Arkansas State at home. When you look at, these types of things. And so when your fans are going, okay, I'm all in on the 10 Big Ten games. That's awesome. I'll take it. And I'll take Iowa State every other year. But what else are you going to give me? In the past, it would be maybe a home Gavitt games, which, kind of sketchy. ACC Big Ten Challenge. Yeah, it would have been great if Roy Williams would have been there the year when people could go.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I think overall, playing these exempt tournaments, you're taking away great games your fans could watch and going somewhere else. And then you're giving them Alabama State, not Alabama, Arkansas State, not Arkansas, North Florida, not Florida, Northern Illinois instead of Notre Dame, games like that. And the fans are just, they're not showing up to those games. And no matter how much the players ridicule them for it, they're not going to come because they're coming to the big ones. And when you're playing, here's Iowa's home nets, 277, 346, 285, 236, 359. And that's the one in Des Moines. UMBC, which is the only one that hasn't been confirmed yet. Now it's 239 and then 255 for Northern Illinois. They're basically glorified scrimmages. They're preseason games, and except for Eastern Illinois last year.
But here is the problem too with and I know this, and it trickles this way at the lower major level too, because I'm talking with everybody at Western Illinois. To have a home game, somebody's got to come there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you try to put together a home and home with, let's say North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
They may not want to come to your place that first year.
Yeah.
And it's like you always try to schedule, so let's say they would have booked, well, okay, then that game might have been on the road. There's always this, everybody wants to be at home first.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a problem with trying to find teams because, how do you do this? Me personally, I want the Manic Hawkeye Classic back. I've been touting that for years. But the thing back to those days when they did have the old Hawkeye Challenge, Mana Hawkeye Classic, whatever it was, there was always a really good second team or a named second team, whether it was even Creighton or Ohio. I remember one year Ohio was there. You think Ohio? Well, Gary Trent was there.
Right.
Gary Trent was one of the best players in the country. Creighton, that one year Creighton was there and they had, some really good players. That was always kind of intriguing. That was always kind of an intriguing thing because that championship game on Saturday night generally was a pretty decent game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that a lot of it has just been everybody's stubborn about wanting to play on the road and playing a home and home. And I think, like I said, if you look around at a lot of non-conference Power 5 schedules, you will see a lot of really good games, but you'll see them on neutral courts or an MTE somewhere. And I think there's a lot of fans because I saw somebody from Indiana grousing about their schedule the other day, and it's the same sort of deal. So, I mean, it's not just an Iowa thing. It's that way around the country at a lot of different places.
Well, it'll be interesting too, Scott, because this attendance is going down. It's national. And you wonder, this isn't going to help anything playing the better games on neutral sites. You got to think that trend continues in major college basketball with attendance going down when there's just not an attractive opponent and you're still having to pay, at least here, I don't know what it is other places, a lot of money for tickets.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem that you're facing, is because fans used to just accept it. Right. Back, 25, 30 years ago, it's like, okay, no problem. It's almost identical to what the NFL faces with preseason football. They still cost the same. And of course they're, even bigger garbage than any of these rum-dum games. But I think when you look at the schedule, what I try to do is, what's the lowest in a major conference? What's the lowest wins you can get to a tournament on average, not necessarily figuring in RPI or net or whatever. And I figure if you can have 5 games against nobodies in your non-conference, I'm fine with that. I mean, Big Ten is a grind, and I will never question that. And in fact, the Big Ten, maybe it ought to just say, have like the SEC football week, before Thanksgiving, have one of those during basketball season where, hey, go get healthy game the second week of February or something. But if you can have 5 nobodies and 6 somebodies, and somebody doesn't have to be Big Ten tournament or, NCAA tournament or even an NIT team, but just somebody with a pulse, I think you're all right. But what I'm looking at here with Iowa is they've got basically 4 games like that. When you're talking about going to Creighton, that's going to be very difficult. I will not expect them to win. Going to Iowa State, very difficult, probably an underdog. Going out to San Diego, That's going to be really good. So USC, Oklahoma, Seton Hall, I think they're all kind of in the same boat there. But the other games are not. And I know they have a young team. They've turned over some talent, but that's not going to do you any good. And Iowa State is even worse, frankly.
That's a good litmus test, isn't it, for what we're talking about? Because Hilton's always packed. No matter, you could have like a junior high team in there playing the Cyclones. Yeah. But if people start getting frustrated with the non-conference schedule at home, I would be surprised if attendance doesn't fall at Hilton.
Well, you look at, let's say, 4 of their teams have RPIs, nets of 338 or worse. The first game, Green Bay, 361. 3-29 last year record-wise. Lindenwood, just moved up, 338. You have Florida A&M, who Iowa's playing in Des Moines. They probably stay in the same hotel, and they go, they're 359. You got 345 with Eastern Illinois, but we know that they're a dangerous 345 net team, because based on what they did at River last year. But and then they've only got one winning. Both teams only have like one winning team coming to their home. Even among them, those types of teams. And it's just, you're hurting the people that provide for you, the people who buy your tickets, people who buy shirts, the people who will support the collective and will donate. And instead you're going to Nowhereville, okay, we're going to, and I think, whether it's Iowa's situation a few years ago when, Iowa was much more public, it was equal in dropping the Big Four Classic. But in Iowa's case, it was, but now we can go play Cincinnati and Chicago, or go to Sioux Falls and play, or play Duke in Madison Square Garden. Oh, yeah, okay, I got it. There's none of that this year. And so then, as you mentioned, John, then comes in, especially Northern Iowa fans, a little bit of Drake, mostly Northern Iowa fans. Well, how can you play these teams and you're not going to play Northern Iowa? I think they're two separate conversations, but I could understand lumping them together when I look at the schedule going, yeah, this isn't going to fly. I'm not going to justify your schedule today.
No, I would like to see, like I said, you would like to see different games, but again, what if the Big Ten schedule expands further? And oh my God, that would just be, you talk about a meat grinder now.
I don't see that happening.
No, I don't think it will either, because I think the coaches have all agreed that 20 is the limit. And because
the women play 18.
Women play 18.
Okay. Yeah. And so you're playing that meat grinder of a conference schedule, and like I said, I can't see them going anymore, because I think those coaches are like, we just get the hell beat out of us from there's that little package of games there in early December. But after Christmas, that's just a war. I had to laugh. I was watching the Fab Five documentary the other night, and they showed the Michigan Notre Dame game when all 5 of the freshmen started. And that was in February. Mm-hmm. It was like on a Sunday in February on NBC. They don't play those. No conference team plays those games now, because you're playing such a grinder of a schedule.
I was going to say, I'm talking to some of the people there. It would not surprise me if it drops to 18 again, because they would love to play 20 because they get a controlled quality content, but they don't have ESPN anymore, which really demanded it. And the other part is, as you said, the coaches hate it. They want to be 18. They want more rum-dums if they can get them. But then the final piece is logistics over USC and UCLA, that getting them to cross the country more often. That to me is probably what will tip it to go to 18 at some point. And then if you're the Big Ten, what I would do is mix up a couple of these rum-dums, and if you have push North Florida and Northern Illinois to mid to late January and mid to late February, so then you can kind of have a breather, break it up, because there is a correlation between tournament success, lack of NCAA tournament success, and the meat grinder that is the Big Ten.
Well, and like I said, we go back to you slipped and said RPI. Mm-hmm. The RPI kind of maybe favored you a little bit more, taking some chances in November and December with tough teams. With the net now, the net is skewed towards the major schools, the Power 5, Power 6, really, if you want to Big East in there. And your net doesn't really move, and it's I kept thinking, you can just see it in the way when you look at the net, by the time you get to mid-February, it's pretty much all high majors.
Yeah.
And it used to be sometimes some teams could slip in the RPI that were, mid-major teams, really good mid-major teams that, now there were a couple of exceptions last year. Oral Roberts was up there, but that was because Oral Roberts was killing everybody in the Summit League and played some tough non-conference games, but still the net is skewed for the major conferences.
That's why it was created.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it was, we need the analytics, we need this in it, and you're not taking into account. Well, then all of a sudden you started seeing, because they started figuring out mid-major teams knew how to game the RPI.
Yes,
they knew that they could play road games against really bad teams, and it counted a lot more than what it should have. And so once the mid-majors figured that out, I was like, oh no, we got to make the change now. So
I think for me, and I know there are hurdles and blockages for this, but I would love to somehow, and I know John was saying he deals with this a lot more, to get you and I and Drake back for Iowa and Iowa State in some way, shape, or form. The Big Four was what it was, but it was something, and now I don't know. And I know it's not exclusive to Iowa. Indiana isn't playing Indiana State.
Yeah, right.
It's not exclusive to Iowa, but I don't know. I think for the sport, it's good for the sport to have that in-state discussion and competition, but it's not important for the big schools anymore and for TV.
It's not important for Iowa. I will agree with that 100%. So when I do discuss it with UNI fans, Iowa has no responsibility to reach down and help anybody out. But because as you mentioned, Rob, there's no, Ball State isn't complaining because it's not playing a home and home with Indiana or Purdue, and Western Illinois isn't complaining that it's not playing the Illini at home.
They are playing the Illini this year, by the way.
Well, that's great.
Yeah,
go Leathernecks. But
anyway.
But the state of Iowa is different. It's a little, pretty provincial state for the most part. And there's a history there. I mean, Drake played Iowa State, I want to say 104 straight years before they dropped out. And so that, they're only 25 miles apart. UNI is kind of new to the party. So I'm not as, the Drake, there's a lot of history, and that kind of sucks. But if you're going to provide these types of schedules for people, if you're going to roll out where, games where it's like, game today, here's the ball, go watch us play, or you're a bad fan. That's, you're asking a lot out of people. I mean, at least there's, if they're playing Northern Iowa, there's 5 or 6 players that have state ties. Drake may have a few too. And of course, an outstanding coach. You're going to get more eyeballs. You're going to get more people caring about the outcome rather than, again, these teams are playing. So whether it's a Big Four Classic or home and home, I don't expect that ever to return, but I think at some point they do need to discuss that. And I know Northern Iowa has, frowned upon being a bye opponent. Not that anybody would want to buy it, but I think that's also something that needs to come down, because UNI 10 years ago, had a lot of success. I mean, they were in the tournament basically every other year. They were in the NIT a lot. They haven't had that recently. And I think they need to kind of establish themselves too. And so if that means, okay, we won't, you're not going to come to the McLeod Center, but we want to go to Hilton one year and Carver the next. I think that would be a fair situation for those two teams to go on the road to Iowa and Iowa State every other year.
I'm surprised the Drake Iowa State series hasn't started up again, just for like what you said. And I'm not gonna, I was gonna mention when we talk about Illinois and Western Illinois, I'll tell you how they're doing it. And I'm not saying to do this with Iowa and UNI and whatever, but it's an MTE where it's Illinois, Western Illinois, Valpo, and Southern. And Western Illinois goes to Illinois, they go to Valpo, and then they get Southern at home. And so there are creative ways sometimes when you can do things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you and I would be, I don't know if you and I or Drake would want to do something like this. And let's be fair, they've done pretty well with their scheduling, even without Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
I know they would like them, but I mean, Drake's gotten in some good tournaments, and UNI finds its way into good tournaments. I mean, they would like to have it up, but they've done a pretty good job with their schedules and finding teams just because of what they've been able to do on the court, and they've become valuable for teams to play other, I don't want to call them mid-majors because I don't want to put the Valley in that. The Valley's kind of in between. Where you play other teams of that size, teams that look like you, Richmond, George Mason, whatever, and you play them home and home. The reason I'm getting darker, it's going to storm here in a minute. So anyway, that's on my So anyway, but like I said, they've done well without Iowa, and they've done well on their schedule, but it's become a little bit more difficult for them now to find games.
Yeah.
And I would assume this stuff will continue to evolve, and obviously media rights deals, conference expansion, all of those things impact scheduling. So we'll see where things go in the future. We are well overdue for a break here. Want to let folks know that support for this podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited for their great work in the state and their support of the podcast. We're going to hear from a few more of our sponsors right now, and we'll be back on the other side to talk some more Hawkeye sports. And we are back here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast, joined by Scott Docterman and John Bonenkamp. I am Rob Howe. If you missed before the break, we had a lot of discussion on the gambling situation, hoop scheduling, beer, a lot of good stuff on that first part. So check that out. I'm going to move along now. A couple more things on the docket here. We'll kind of zip through a little bit quicker because we've been going a long time here. Let's start with Caitlin Clark. Won a big award. She was the best way to explain it is the overall top women's collegiate athlete in the country. There was a ceremony the other night where they had the players of the year for each sport, and she was the overall player of the year. So that's a great honor for her. Today, she was the female athlete of the year in the Big Ten. She was held a Zoom yesterday for her appearance in the John Deere Classic this weekend in the Quad Cities. I don't know when this young lady rests, to be honest with you. She just seems like she's on the go all the time, John. And Scott and I have talked about it before. I'm just amazed with how she handles all this stuff and the popularity and the celebrity, and just she doesn't miss a beat.
I think I think a lot of that has to do with the support system around her, and it's the family, and it's, this person's taking care of my finances. This person reviews what I do, that sort of thing. And they keep her grounded. And I think reason why a lot of it does is she understands the responsibility that comes with what she does. And it's, she's a representative. People watch her, and so I think she likes that. And it's like, she wants to be a good example. She wants to be a role model. And I think I think she carries with her that responsibility. And I think she truly appreciates every opportunity, whether it's, whatever it is, that she appreciates the opportunity to connect with a fan base, to connect with people, like little kids, whatever, And we've seen it. We've all seen it, the autographs that she signs and never, and I think she enjoys every minute of it. And it's not an ego thing. I think she looks at it as a genuine, this is what I have to do. This is, and I admire that about her greatly.
She's a transcendent force in collegiate sports and sports today, frankly. I mean, you remove the gender, you remove the sport, and you just say the name's Caitlin Clark. I mean, maybe I'm a little close or provincial, but even with Caleb Williams being the returning Heisman Trophy winner from, Southern California, I think Caitlin Clark's got bigger name recognition. And I think her impact on sports is profound. And it's because of how she handles herself. And yes, she came from a well-grounded family. She's had practice with all of this, but it's also innate. It's also her, the way she handles herself, the way she approaches situations, and she's brilliant. I mean, she's a distinguished scholar. She's the academic All-American of the year, and she is equal in that prowess on the floor. And so it draws people with her, and her humility and confidence, and they're not mutually exclusive, I think really resonate with a younger generation of young men and women. It's not just, gender specific, really galvanize around her. I've seen little boys with 22 shirts and wearing them, and there's stories upon stories of boys hitting 3-pointers and they're going like this, and it's not for Michael Jordan like when I was growing up, it's for Caitlin Clark. And that's something that we've never seen before. And so the ability to do that and handle herself publicly in the ways that she does, and do it with such grace and dignity, but toughness too. I mean, she's just transcendent of every single category, which is why she's the most popular athlete in college sports. And you look at all the records Iowa has set on television. 5 out of the 6 most viewed women's basketball games in BTN history involve Iowa, and 3 in the last couple of years. You look at the Final Four numbers. To me, I think the biggest one of all is what she's done on the road in the Big Ten. When you have 8,500 more fans go to a Nebraska game than average, 6,500 more at Michigan, almost 6,000 more in Indiana, and Ohio State, 4,400 more. That to me tells you about her. And when I've got fans reaching out to me from cheer for the other team, but I'm also here to see 22. And you got little girls wearing Ohio State t-shirts, but they want an autograph from Caitlin Clark. That's a power that you just can't, it's organic and it's innate in her. And I think she's the most impactful student athlete I've ever seen. And that's sport and off the court.
It'll be interesting to see kind of what type of traffic she produces at John Deere, because that's a pretty popular event as it is, John, and you're pretty familiar with that. What type of crowd she brings, what the gallery is going to look like for Caitlin Clark and Zach Johnson this weekend.
Oh, everybody will love watching that. And I started thinking I'll probably see her at the IndyCar weekend at Iowa Speedway, because Hy-Vee's a sponsor, and she gave the start your engines command last year for one of the races. And I like I said, I think she truly just embraces this and loves. I mean, I'm sure it gets exhausting. And it's, I was really curious. I saw pictures over the weekend. She was at the Taylor Swift concert in Minneapolis with a bunch of other players. I wonder if anybody noticed her. I wonder if anybody in the crowd looked, hey, Caitlin Clark's here at the concert, whatever. I wonder if anybody, it's kind of funny, because I think sometimes when she's out in public, I think she just kind of blends in, and, and if you didn't know she was going to be there, you wouldn't know she was there. And so I think she finds ways around the celebrity, but I think that she has done a great job. And the one thing I sometimes think we forget, that first year that she played was not in front of fans. Mm-hmm. The only way, now we were there, but now the only way everybody saw her play was on television. what would be her magnitude had there been a year of fans, just added on to what they've seen over the last couple of years? What would the impact be? How greater would it be? I don't know. But my favorite moment with her, I always tell this story, it was when she was a sophomore. And I had covered the game that night. And I didn't have to write anything right away. So I went back, got my stuff, came up the elevator. And she's standing there in the lobby with her dad, and her dad always says hello to me. He's a really, really nice guy. He always says hello. And she turned around and she goes, "Hey, thanks for coming." And I'm like, when's the last time I've had an athlete thank me for covering a game? Yeah. And that was to me was like really, that was when I was like, this is a different type of athlete that we're seeing here. And it's been amazing to be a part of this ride for the first 3 years.
Yeah, no question. And that's why no matter what happens this year, and it, you hate to say it, but disappointments can happen at tournament games. And I hope that people don't judge her by, if they win the national title, that's outstanding. It's the greatest singular event that ever happened in Iowa history. And the fact that they got to a championship game last year doesn't mean at all that they can get there again this year.
Exactly.
And I hope, though, people appreciate what she does and who she is, because, man, I don't want to sound like I'm hyperbolic here, but her impact is so amazing beyond even the University of Iowa. The only person I think in stature that measures up is Niall Kinnick. And that's crazy. That's something I never would ever utter. But when you're looking at, Luka Garza was National Player of the Year 2 years in a row, 1 year unanimously. Didn't have that. Had a great player, no question, and had a lot of fans. Not the kind of impact that Caitlin Clark has. Any wrestler, Spencer Lee was as good of a wrestler Iowa's ever had. Not Caitlin Clark. Because when she is on television and the way she handles herself, and as you said, John, like last year, I was arguing with Nebraska fans over that attendance jump there. And, and then she sends me, she DMs me this picture from that game. And she's like, yeah, this was 45 minutes after the game, and there's still 2,000 people there she's giving autographs to, and half of them are in red. 45 minutes after that game. You can't tell me there's not a Caitlin Clark effect because you're too proud that you don't want to stoop yourself and say Iowa actually has something good going on.
When she had that game, is the game right before Christmas on the same day that Iowa, the men lost Eastern Illinois, and they had that day game, and she autographed the pair of shoes. Mm-hmm. And it turned out it was a girl from Southeast Iowa, a little girl from Southeast Iowa that got it. And I started seeing things on Facebook from people that I knew this family and all this. And just that impact on a child, it pays dividends. I don't care what it is. And because it's not just the child, it's everybody in that community. Hey, Caitlin Clark did this for her. Mm-hmm. You can make that kind of impact as a player. That's, that is, I truly appreciate what she's done and where, and the things she's done.
Yeah, no doubt. She is as Scott said, a transcendent athlete, and look forward to the season. However it shakes out, should be exciting. And I think they're going to get some. Speaking of basketball attendance and tickets, that's going to be a tough ticket to get this year. So hopefully you got yours, and if not, can get a way to get in there and watch that team. Should be an exciting team. Let's wrap up our sports talk with we'll touch on recruiting a little bit here. Big weekend last weekend for Iowa football, their biggest of the year in terms of official visits. Iowa has secured 3 verbal commitments so far from a scholarship standpoint, and then also Graham Eben, a safety from Central Line. George Little Rock is he's a walk-on now. That could change. It's a 24 class, could be a gray shirt, could end up being a scholarship. We'll see how that plays out. They like him a lot. To bring him in on the official visit weekend gives an indication of how highly they think of him. And then you also have Devin Kennedy, a defensive end from Arizona, from Phoenix, has played 1 year of college football. Interesting prospect there. Reese Vanderzee addresses a need, as we all know, at wide receiver. He is also from Central Lyon, George Little Rock, which gave Iowa Zach Lutmer in the 23 class. So they're doing some pretty good things up there in Northwest Iowa. That school won the state football and state basketball, boys basketball state championships last year. And then Gavin Hoffman. I think I said to Scott last week, either on or off the podcast, I thought he was a Missouri lean. That one surprised me a little bit. And then after we got off the air last week as well, Scott, and we had been talking about this, Michael Burt, who I'm going to talk to later today for a prospect podcast, also committed. So it's kind of just been a flurry in June here. Iowa's up, I think, to 15 verbal commitments in this class. So
yeah.
Still a ways to go, but a pretty good start here. I kind of just did, and take this for what it's worth, folks. If you cover Iowa football, if you follow Iowa football, you have to put the rankings in perspective and context and understand kind of how Iowa recruits. I know that drives people crazy. Why don't they get 4 and 5 stars all the time? But this class is around the middle of the Big Ten right now in terms of the major scouting outfits that rank them. That's fine. That's where Iowa often is. I would take and advise people to kind of look individually at this class, how well Iowa's done in state in particular. Reese Vanderzee is a guy, they went head to head with Iowa State and got a commitment from him. That's an important one. I like this class. It's coming together. There's still work to do, but I thought it was a successful weekend for Iowa football in terms of, trying to build this 24 class.
It's a developmental class. And, they started out by just grabbing whether it was low-hanging fruit, but low-hanging fruit athletes at the very beginning. And they did a nice job there. Now that they had their major weekend, I think you're seeing it come together exactly the way they want it. They had a real quick burst out of the gate. I think they're going to get some more here. They were able to secure. I thought, in fact, last week, I think Eric Carner had not committed yet to Texas A&M.
Yeah, we were talking about him too. Yeah.
So he committed. That opened up maybe it didn't. I don't know. Maybe they know more than we. But Gavin Hoffman, which was, I think, a really strong situation there. It was competitive with Missouri and Arizona State. It looked like it was going to probably be Missouri. He's from Overland Park, and he ends up at Iowa. So they got their tight ends. I thought Reese Vanderzee, again, not looking at the rankings, looking at the person and the player. And
go watch the film. I watched it again yesterday. Go watch his highlights.
He's a likable player, man. I mean, if he was at Dowling, or if he was at Wheaton, somewhere in Wheaton, Illinois, somewhere in there, he would have been probably a higher 3-star in my eyes. And then I think we're going to see a couple of defensive backs, a couple more defensive linemen, maybe a wide receiver, and then they'll probably shut it down or come close to it, maybe hold open a scholarship or two, because, now with the transfer portal, Rob, you've got to balance it. You've got to still have your development. And especially at a place like Iowa, you can't project Bodie McCaslin, to come in right away and start. Will Nolan, you've got to develop them so they become the core of your class. Cody Fox. But what you can do is supplement them. And they did a really good job of that, I thought, this year in the transfer portal. Maybe they won't make that same type of investment in the future, but maybe they will. And you've got to make sure you have open scholarships preserved. So you need a couple wide receivers, but now it's up to Kelton Copeland. Go develop those wide receivers. So maybe you only need one, maybe you need 0. Maybe it's a situation where a Charlie Jones comes around. But I like the way this is developed. I think they went around about it the right way. They've got good prospects, players who fit. And, somebody like, Devin Kennedy, Jimmy Kennedy's kid, he looked like, I'm like, wow, starter kit all the way there. Long arms, really athletic, only 1 year of football, which is crazy. But now, he's still pretty long, but you get him in 50, 60, 70 pounds possibly, and you're talking about an elite player.
Chauncey Golston, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
He was
I was
pretty
getting-
raw when he came in. Sorry, John.
Yeah.
I was getting sons of former Rams. I mean, we got Flipper's son, Jimmy Kennedy's son. No, the one thing I like, and I think in the end, and Scott brought this up about developing players, but also going in the portal and getting what you need. We're still really young in this transfer portal era. And I think football, you're going to see this, basketball, you're going to see this. The best teams that survive out of this are the ones that do that, that develop players, but also fill in holes. The ones that go get a whole new roster every year, and I'm speaking basketball here, not football so much, but even in football, if you build all your stuff around, it's going to be hit and miss. You're either going to hit all the way or you're not going to. And I think Iowa has figured that out. And when you're talking about play with fans wanting 5 stars and all that, have they not figured out yet, after all these years, that Iowa figures out a way to find dudes? Just guys that you never thought of that become really good football players. And I think that will happen in every class, from what you've seen, and it'll happen with this class too.
I think Iowa does a good job of building its recruiting board. And they aim pretty high early. They're also a school that other schools watch. And when they offer, you'll notice other schools will offer, particularly ones in this region from around here, north, little west, little farther west.
Yeah.
And that happens, but they've done a good job in this class of maybe guys they offered earlier that they didn't get, then they went down the board. Even Gavin Hoffman is a guy they offered at the beginning of this month. He went to Lindenwood, which is for those folks that don't know, it's kind of it's a camp where a bunch of different college coaches come and watch, and you can kind of break out there. And that's what he did. And he got a bunch of offers out of that, but he had already visited here in the spring. So Iowa was on him before the Lindenwood camp. And then obviously he blew up, but they go down their board. And just because you don't get maybe the guys higher on your board, I would caution people to worry when they go down the board, because I'll just use tight end, for example, Sam Laporta, Luke Lachey, George Kittle. Go down the list of guys that they get late in the process. And there are, Scott, the blue chip guys. Kirk likes to say his sister can identify those players. But after that, it's tough. There's a group of guys that are very similar, but they benefit from coming into an Iowa program where they can be developed. And maybe the guys that they're on maybe equal footing with in high school, they surpass because they come to a program that knows how to develop them.
Exactly. And that's why they spend so much time and resources and effort into identifying players that fit them. And, I don't want to get overly generalize some of the differences necessarily, because that's more talking points for them. But when you look at players who are, who have a mental, a mindset of continuous improvement, toughness, work ethic.
And we see that with the guys they got out of the portal.
Yeah, they all fit. They're exactly what they want. And when you look at, to me, the most recent poster child that all of this should wrap around for Iowa is Sam Laporta. Highland, Illinois, kind of out there. Illinois didn't even look at him. They would now, but they didn't then. And he was, Bowling Green and a couple other schools. And he was wondering, why isn't anybody coming? Iowa finds him basically because Matt Martin, Kate Martin's dad, who also coached AJ Epineza at Edwardsville, clues in LeVar Woods. Hey, you might want to take a look at this guy. And he goes to a track meet and sees AJ Epineza, and he's like, Sam really wasn't standing out in track. But then he went to a basketball game. He's like, okay, this is where he stands out. And, they get this guy, good athlete, great mental toughness, has a desire to improve, all those intangibles that they rely on so heavily. And then they offer him, he was the third tight end in that class. Logan Lee, who immediately flipped over to D-line, it's really good there. And Josiah Miaman, who has since transferred. You know, Sam was like, you looked at it, developmental guy, probably take a year or two. No, he played. He had more catches than any other Iowa pass catcher in the Holiday Bowl. And you look at the players that were on the field, you know, talk about some dudes on the other team, you know, but that's a poster child for what Iowa can do. And, you know, the thing is, when you have those upper echelon talents, you're swinging for the fences and you can get more at bats, let's say. But I think overall, when you find somebody who has a little bit of a deficiency and Iowa thinks they can correct it, whether that's be a little bit better with lateral movement, maybe gain 40 more pounds. They're pretty damn good at this. And that's why they've been one of the most successful programs in the Big Ten for a long, long time.
Yeah, no doubt. And they have a great eye for talent and being able to see guys that aren't maybe the prototypical body type or size, and they see the potential there, a la Josie Jewell, you know, Seth Benson, guys like that. You can go position by position, safety, the walk-on history at free safety in the program. All of that stuff is well documented, and it's a formula and a blueprint that works year in and year out. We'll see where the rest of this recruiting class ends up going. That will be it for our sports talk today. And now we get to the part of the podcast where I both am looking forward to and not looking forward to, and that's talking about the passing of our friend and colleague, Steve Batterson from the Quad City Times on Tuesday. John, we'll start with you. I think you were the closest of us with Steve. I knew him since 97 because he was on the beat before I got here, and I was the second guy on the beat when I got here in 97 at the Press Citizen. And I will share one quick story here before I turn it over to John. Glenn Worley, Iowa City West, one of the better high school basketball players I've seen in my time here. There was a side note, a game where I remember Tom Izzo and Tom Crean being at West High, trying to win over Glenn Worley, who ended up going to Iowa, as we know. But he was getting close to his commitment, and he and his parents, who I got to know, invited me over to the house. So I'm sitting there, and this is the old days. There's no internet. So it's going to be in a paper. That's how this story is going to break. So the phone's ringing. I'm wondering who that is. It's freaking Batterson. He's calling as I'm in the living room, and so Glenn's talking to him on the phone. I'm talking to his parents. Pizza's being delivered. I think Steve ended up getting the story over me on this one anyway, but that was the type of I think the one thing that's popped out for all of us, and the thing we all acknowledge about Steve and know, and it's just fact indisputable, is the guy worked harder than anybody else. And that was my first kind of exposure to it. That was 98, 99, something like that. But had known Steve for a few years at that point and got to know him through the years. But John knew him a lot more personally, or a lot closer. You guys hung out a lot, lunch, things like that. Had minor league baseball in common, and I would encourage people to read the Quad City Times, Don Doxey's piece. I think that gives a really beautiful overview of Steve and his life.
You know, I was thinking yesterday about what his football schedule would be like on a weekend. He were a high school game on Friday night. If Iowa was home, by the way, my alarm's going off, so we must have a storm warning coming. So if you see me get blown away here, anyway, his football weekend, if Iowa was home, he would have a Friday night high school football game somewhere, come over to Iowa City on Saturday, cover the game on Saturday. On Sunday mornings, he would be in the office at 8 a.m. putting together his AP football poll. And he just did everything. And it was, you knew in February, if there was an afternoon game at Carver, he would have a night basketball game somewhere else in a postseason game. You know, he'd do a girls' basketball game somewhere. I mean, he just did everything. To his credit, when he was on vacation, he was on vacation. He would leave town. He would go, do things for his family. He would do things like that. But when he was working, God knows how many hours. And Craig DeVries, who worked with him there for such a long time, had a story last night on Facebook, and they told the story of, it was back in 2009. It was a Friday night. Daryl Bates, kind of familiar name for people who covered high school sports. Daryl was retired, but still covering games for him. And Daryl had a heart attack covering the Bettendorf game that night. And they found him in a church parking lot. He had pulled off the road and had died. And they were scrambling around, this becomes this big chaos. At the Times, everybody's trying to find out where's Daryl. Daryl, covered back. And he told about how, when they kind of found out what was going on, he said the first thing Batterson did was call the Bettendorf coach to put together some sort of story on the game because he knew they needed that. And then the next day he was in at 8 a.m. calling people to do the memorial story on Daryl. And I thought that, that was him. It was the newspaper. He loved the Times. He loved that sports section. He loved the Daily Iowan because that's where he got his start.
He didn't treat Iowa, covering Iowa, any different than St. Ambrose.
No,
Right.
No, this was whatever game he was at was the most important game of the day to him, And by the way, this may be the first podcast being done during a tornado warning.
Oh no! If you need to go,
no, I don't.
Please don't get swept away.
I'm not going to worry about this. But anyway, the sirens are going off. But whatever game he did was the most important, and he, like I said, he loved the Daily Iowan. He loved the Quad City Times, and he really put his life and everything into those places because they meant so much to him. And I don't think people realize what he did. He was not about flash. He was not about social media. He was not about, all the stuff that we all do. And he just, the game was the most important thing.
I think everybody has the same perspective on him as a worker, a grinder. I don't think there's a bigger grinder that's ever worked in this state than Steve Batterson. And
what was it, like 2,500 minor league baseball games or something like that?
Probably.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
If you go, because that league plays here. And he was covering them when I first started covering my first go around of covering the Midwest League in 1993. And he'd been doing it for about 5 years. So you're talking about from 1980 something on.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I'll mention the Midwest League and Todd Brommelkamp and I were talking about this last week at lunch. Bats would do the Times would do once a week a full Midwest League page. And he would do a feature story on a River Bandits player. He would do a feature story on a Clinton player because they extended into Clinton. And he would have a notes package from around the league. And it's like nobody does that anymore. But for the longest time, that was that sports section, was his weekly Midwest League page. And he knew more about the league. If I had questions, on player development contracts that were coming up, with teams and affiliates, he knew everything. And so he was, he did everything, and God bless him. He and I, we spent a lot of time together on the road. We never found a bad restaurant. And we had so many inside jokes, and just in the last couple of weeks, I wanted to text him something that I've run across that I knew he would get a kick out of, and I knew he wouldn't see the text, and that made me feel really bad. I mean, and it's a loss. It's a personal loss for me, and it's a professional loss for all of us. And he was one of my best friends on the beat, and I'll never forget that.
I always used to remember seeing you guys laughing off to the side, and I always be like, oh, I'm missing some good joke there. But I do know the 10-2 joke.
Yes.
And there's another one too I can't think of. Scott, I'm sorry. I interrupted you earlier. Share some thoughts on Steve, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Well, Steve and Daryl Bates, some of the old guard of the Quad City Times, kind of, I would look to them as kind of mentors. Growing up in Burlington, working at the Hawkeye, working with John for 5 years as a part-timer and an intern, and also over at Western Illinois, I was in communication with them, and I did a couple of stories, strung some stories for them, and then Daryl helped me get a job, my first job at Muscatine, the Muscatine Journal in 1997. I was looking for work, and he said there's a job in Muscatine, and I don't want to. I know it's about Steve, but Daryl's brother Roger was forced out of there first, and just such stupid circumstances, but he still thought enough of me to put me there, and watching him and Batterson, the way they worked, it was couldn't have been a better training ground for a young journalist. And I think that today, whether it's with websites, I mean, we lose something without having that training ground for old school newspaper guys. And I think Batterson was the last of the really old school newspaper guys that way, because you watched the work ethic, the grind, the ability to always get what needed to be got, to take the extra call to do what it needs to be done for both of them. And then with Daryl, just his personal relationships with people, and Steve too. And I just think that it's such a great loss, because Steve had an understated personality. He wasn't the guy to yap, in a lot of places. He really didn't pipe up very much anywhere. He wasn't as much on social media, other than, maybe tweeting from a game or whatever, but you just had to admire the way he went about his business. And I'd always just shake my head, because like on a Tuesday during football season, he might wake up and first thing he filed a story on Augie or St. Ambrose, and then came over to Iowa City and then covered the press conference there. And then on the way back, he'd be in Tipton or, covering girls volleyball or Clinton or a Bandits game that night. And I'm like, God, part of me is because we grew up in this era of newspapers, and Steve's a little bit older than all of us, but, I'm like, damn, they chewed him up, and now granted, he loved doing all of that. So in some ways it was a labor of love, but I also thought, man, they should have taken care of him a little bit better. And
there was, and I can attest to, because I do this now on Tuesdays, is I'll do Kirk, and then I'll go down and I do my office hours when I work with the Daily Iowan kids. And then usually I cover a volleyball game in the fall. And I'll tell you what, by about 10 o'clock, I'm wiped out. And he did that all the time. And it was Fran press conference on a Friday, and then back for Davenport West against Assumption, stuff like that. And we forget sometimes the Quad City Times back in the 90s and 2000s, that was a hell of a sports section, as good as anybody in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And it was,
they covered Illinois and Iowa.
Yes, they were home and away, Illinois and Iowa. You had they covered the Quad City Thunder. I remember late 80s, early 90s, they were going worldwide with Michael Nunn, the boxer. And I remember the Monty Cox story. He went down in Mexico and he had a fight. There was a fight down in Mexico, and he got locked in a stadium and had to climb over a fence to get out, which we've all done probably at state track here.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were everywhere. And he was, right there, he did Illinois all those years, and he had so many Illinois stories. Lauren Tate story. We all have one.
Yeah, Lauren.
But I mean, everybody knew him. Everybody in the conference knew him. And it's amazing how many people reached out yesterday that we saw on social media. I got messages from a lot of different people, and I just wish he knew. I wish he knew what people were saying, and I wish he knew the impact of what he's done. I would like to think he and Sue's having some pretty good laughs right now, because I know they were really good friends. So I just thought of that. So I'm going to miss him. It's going to be tough. So
Yeah, it's going to be a hard season. I remember, obviously, again, don't feel I was impacted as much as you, John, when Susan passed, but that was tough too. Just not seeing her, not getting her baked goods anymore, and that the friendliness that she brought.
I failed in that. I'm not a good cook. So I failed in that.
That can be that certainly is understandable. No, I would doubt you would have fallen short of her baking expertise. No doubt about that. But not having Steve around anymore is just going to be very weird, and it's going to leave a hole in all of our hearts. And I have that picture of him kind of standing there, like if he was in my group doing shorthand, just the old school. He would shorthand those interviews and have his quotes before any of us were freaking flipping through recordings, and he's got it all already before anybody has it, because he's so good at shorthand. And the other inside joke was the sandbar for the Orange Bowl and Steve's determination to get into the back room at the sandbar in Miami. Those of us who were there will understand, or have heard the stories of that, will understand that inside joke, inside story. But man, it's almost surreal. It still hasn't sunk in for me.
I know. I told the story, 99 NCAA tournament. We were in Phoenix. We were looking for a place to eat the night before Iowa played Connecticut. And Batterson's found this place called Cork and Cleaver. And we went there, and it was a nice place. It was a nice little small restaurant. The menu was stenciled on a big meat cleaver.
That's unique.
Yes, which was unique. Food was great and all that. So I go back 4 years later, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to Phoenix. I've been a friend of mine. And he's like, are you going to go to Cork? And 5 blocks from where my friend lived. We were driving somewhere, and I was like, wait, there's Cork and Cleaver, I said. And we didn't go there, but I was like, God, I remember that place. And to this day, we would still bring that up, so we could have 2 hours on just Batterson stories. So
did want to acknowledge Dargan Southard shared his rest in peace bats in our chat room, as did Robin Tucker. Appreciate them acknowledging the great loss that we experienced this week, and going to take some time. It'll definitely take some time for healing on this one. And as John said, I hope somewhere Steve's looking down and can appreciate how much we respect him and what he did for our profession and the professional that he was, and the impact he had. I think what he would be, and John, you could probably speak to this more, the thing that he's probably most proud of, the stories he told for athletes. I mean, I think that was his reward for all this, beyond, monetary compensation, was the lives he touched.
Last year, and I told the story that yesterday, that he really loved the telling the stories, the Quad City. And I remember last year there was that week when this kid from Wapello, who was playing at Western Illinois, had a 99-point week in 3 games. He goes to he's National Player of the Week in college basketball, and Bats did a story on him. And I mean, because he was a Wapello kid. Wapello was in their circulation area, and so he did it. And that's the way he was, and that's what he did.
Survived by his mother, his brother, and niece. Services in Washington, 10th and 11th, I believe, for Steve. And certainly will make my way down to that. And I'm sure that will be emotional as well. But he's been in my thoughts a lot since he's gotten ill and went into the hospital, and certainly won't leave them anytime soon.
Yep.
All right, folks, we appreciate you listening to the podcast and giving us a chance to talk about our friend who will be dearly missed. We thank all of our sponsors. We thank all of you for listening. John, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your memories of Steve during a difficult time. Really
Glad
appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.
And Scott and I will talk to you next Thursday on the Hotspot podcast. Say goodbye, Scott.